This is an emergency post-budget exclusive broadcast with two ex-Chancellors of the UK, Jeremy Hunt and Kwasi Kwarteng. In their only media interviews exclusively for Disruptors, following the budget, we unpack Labour's policy U-turns and the controversy surrounding the reported OBR pre-budget leak.
I think some of them are intentional and some of them are accidental.
That to me is serious.
Nothing is held back and these truths are brutal.
Growth was completely sacrificed.
If you tax people enough, they will leave.
Do you think Rachel Reeves is qualified to be the UK Chancellor?
In all candour.
But first, let me know in the comments what you think about Labour's budget plans. And now, here are not one, but two ex-UK Chancellors' unfiltered thoughts. Jeremy, what shocked you the most about the budget?
I think that I felt a bit betrayed, actually, because obviously I'm a Conservative and, I've got skin in the game as a former Chancellor, but I was really giving Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer the benefit of the doubt on an individual level. I think they're both decent people and, different political traditions, but I really did think that we would have a party that, yes, they were never going to agree with me on the need to bring taxes down, but I thought the basic philosophy was going to be pro-business. And I think yesterday, very sadly, growth was completely sacrificed to the internal Labour Party debate about welfare spend. And I think it's going to make it much harder to get out of our low growth trap. So I was pretty disappointed, actually.
What made you think that Labour would be pro-business?
Look, by the way, I'm going to try and say some cheerful things because I don't want this to be like a morgue after the budget. But I absolutely believed Rachel Reeves when she told everyone that she wasn't going to put taxes up on working people, and that she said countless times that you can't run the economy just by asking people to pay more tax. It has to come from growth. And so I was looking for some, big efforts to unlock growth. And, here's my first positive thing. The fundamentals for the UK economy are fantastic. I mean, we talked about this last time, but my kids are 11, 13 and 15. And if I was going to choose a big European country for them to be born in, I would definitely choose the UK. You can find smaller European countries that really got their act together, like Switzerland or Denmark. And economists say that there is sometimes special factors which make it easier for countries of 3 to 5 million population to do really well. But if you're looking at the big countries, I mean, what we've got are the things that ought to really make us successful. I mean, we've got outside the US the most respected universities in the world, 3 of the world's top 10. We've got the 3rd largest tech sector in the world after the United States and China. And this is the century of AI. And what you've got as well is, all our universities now, starting with Oxford, Cambridge and Imperial, there's a sort of triangle, but actually spreading well beyond those, they've all got these amazing campuses with business parks, science parks, tech parks, spin-outs galore. So there's some brilliant things happening here. I heard recently, I wasn't able to verify it, but someone said to me that if you look at the top 100 quantum companies in the world, 3/4 of them are in the UK. So if that's true, that is really, really impressive. So the fundamentals are great. It's just we do need to deal with some of the structural problems that have been holding us back.
Do you think Labour are starting to break down those fundamentals?
I'm worried that we're going to have a period of prolonged stagnation. And, I've been in politics for long enough to know that when you're under pressure and when you get into the bunker in politics, you start giving up on the idea of winning over new hearts and minds and just playing to your base. You start thinking, if only I can get the people who voted Labour last time to vote Labour next time, then we might get through the next election. And I'm not going to bother to win the argument with everyone else because they're obviously going to vote against us. That was part of our mentality in the final part of the Conservative administration. We kind of given up thinking we'd persuade floating voters, and we just wanted to make sure that our core voters came home. And I feel Labour's already got into that position. I mean, this £3 billion for getting rid of the two-child cap. I mean, we can talk about the rights and wrongs of it, but it's unpopular in the country. The country do not agree that we should say to people on benefits, you don't have to face the same trade-offs about how many children you have that everyone else has to face. And the country don't agree with lifting that cap. But obviously Labour MPs, the Labour Party faithful do. And sure enough, they were thrown a bone.
Kwasi, what shocked you the most about the budget?
Very good question. I mean, I think that the relentless tax rises, but the tax rises were all, I think there were 43 separate measures.
Wow.
Because what they've done is they committed not to raising income tax, VAT or national insurance on employees, and they couldn't raise any of them because they would contradict the manifesto. And I think Reeves wanted to do that, hence the sort of press conference 3 weeks ago. But because they couldn't do that, they went through this sort of what I call an itsy-bitsy approach. But all those measures were raising tax.
And what was the worst one, do you think?
So I think the mansion tax will arguably be the most regressive, well, the most forbidding. Because if you look at the top rate, 40% was introduced, I think, in 88. In 90 to 91, and Ed Ball said this today on GMB, which I was on, only 2% of people paid the 40% rate. And now, of course, it's something like 25, nearly 30%. So you can live in a world where, 2 million sounds incredibly valuable house. But you know as well as I do, in 15 years' time, a two-bedroom flat in Neasden will be paying the mansion tax, or the equivalent thereof. And that's what I think is a big problem.
Right. So just how socialist do you think Labour are?
So this is a very interesting question. I think in her bones, Rachel Reeves is not a socialist. Well, she's a social democrat. She's not a full left. But it's obvious to me that they're being pulled to the left because of the political dynamics. I looked at the polls this morning. Reform are 28% roughly. Labour on about 19%. The Greens are on 16, 17%. So you can see a world where the left is totally fractured. You've got left-wing Labour MPs. You've got Zach Polanski, the hypnotist. So he calls himself. Well, you know about that. You've got.
He's on next.
He's on next. He's the real head.
He's not.
You've got. Various Islamist parties or leaning parties. The left is totally fractured, and in order to have a chance of winning or getting back into power, I think they've made the decision that they've got to go left. They've got to corral as much of that left-wing vote behind them, actually, to win office. And I think that's the game they're playing. So they're being pulled to the left. Even though some of their instincts aren't that left-leaning. I'll give you an example. Beginning of the year, they said they were not going to lift the cap on 2 children, the welfare cap. Rachel Reeves was very adamant about that. We can't afford it. And of course, yesterday, that's exactly what they did. And if you looked at the House of Commons when she announced that got the biggest cheer from Labour MPs. They were waving the order paper. We do that much better, actually, the waving of the order. But anyway, they did a version of it, and I was surprised. I was surprised at how enthusiastically they welcomed that.
Do you think we're paying too much welfare in the UK right now?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's clear to me that, and that's one. People talk about the mini budget. That was where we went wrong. We should be cutting. Or not cutting spending. I mean, for mathematicians, it should be sorting the first order. So the raise of expenditure, the increase in expenditure, should be much lower, that increase, than it is today. You're growing the economy at 1.5%, and the welfare bill is going up 4%. The maths doesn't work.
Wow. So does it feel like in the UK, you're rewarded for not working and penalised for working?
Yeah. Basically. I mean, the problem with the situation we're in, and it's a Western problem, is that we've got welfare states that were created, after the Second World War, 80 years ago. Totally different demographic, totally different dynamics. And we're funding that welfare state where we have a lot less money, a lot less growth. And frankly, there's a lot more immigration than there ever has been. So if you think you're earning less money, but you're creating a welfare state, which you have to pay for, and you simply don't have the means to raise the revenue through growth to pay for the public services and the welfare.
What one thing that Labour changed at the budget that you thought maybe that's the most destructive?
The one that most worried me, I think was most economically illiterate, was the extra bands of council tax on more expensive homes. Now, this is not, by the way, a sort of traditional Tory wanting to protect his wealthy friends. I'm very happy with wealthier people paying more tax. I think overall, everyone is paying too much now, and we need to start bringing it down, as I started to do. But you will remember, and I was not popular for this, but in the 2022 autumn statement, I reduced the threshold that you pay the 45p rate from 150,000 to 125,000. So a lot of people didn't like that. I'm just saying that because the principle that when times are tough, we should ask wealthier people to pay their fair share, I have no problem with. But this is madness, because the one thing that could happen in the next year that would get the economy motoring is the property market starting to take off as interest rates come down. As we know, inflation has nearly doubled in the last year, and that's meant that interest rates have stayed higher than they would otherwise have been. But there is now the prospect that they would start to come down and people start to buy properties. But with this measure, which is not going to take effect for another 3 years, but it is going to gum up the top end of the property market, which will have an impact on the rest of the property market as well. And it's only going to raise £400 million, which in Treasury terms is absolutely nothing. But it is going to be another signal that, this country is not backing enterprise and successful people. And I just think it's a really big miscalculation.
So a few hours before the budget, there was a leak. Was that an accident, or was that not an accident?
Well, God, it's been very chaotic, and I think some of them are intentional and some of them are accidental. So the one that was done like an hour before the budget was someone in the Office for Budget Responsibility who put up the OBR's verdict on the budget before the budget itself. And I think that was an accident, but they're doing an inquiry into that. I don't think that was malicious, but who knows. And then there were lots of leaks from the government trying to soften us up. At one stage, they thought they were going to raise income tax, and they were trying to soften us up for that. Those were obviously deliberate. But then this time what was different is there were lots of unplanned leaks. So when they changed their mind and decided they weren't going to charge us, raise income tax, that got out there immediately. And, it was very chaotic. And for some reason, it's gone very badly wrong on this budget. And my only point is, party politics aside, we must sort this out. Because there is something that is a bit different about the UK, which is that because the whole world speaks English, and the BBC is on TV in Singapore, and people in Tokyo and New York read the Financial Times and The Economist. When you have this kind of chaos, the whole world knows. Now you could have this chaos in the run-up to the German budget or the French budget, and probably no one outside France or Germany would ever really know about it, but they know about it when it happens to us. And it's not good for our global reputation. And so I think we need to sort it out.
I think it's a convenient thing to have happened. Because if you remember the mini budget, we kept it all to ourselves, and then we announced it, I announced it, and the markets puked because they didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
So ever since then, the Treasury has just leaked everything. They've leaked everything.
So all because of
markets, I think I was, yeah, they're reacting against me. And I think there is they said, the markets didn't move at all. Of course they didn't. They knew exactly what was going to be in it.
Yeah.
And when the OBR did it, that was like belt and braces. Okay, we've leaked everything, and now we're really going to leak everything. And oops, oh my God, it's on the website. And then and what surprised me was, if that happened, the head of the OBR would be like, what the, happened? Yeah. This is terrible. They'd be flustered. But he immediately said, oh no, it's a terrible mistake. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Do you know what I mean? It was so sort of slick, his apology. And I thought, that's interesting. And these are just my own thoughts. But I think that it was convenient for the government for it to come out in that way. That's what I think. Doesn't mean they did it deliberately, but it was not the worst thing as far as they were concerned. That's what I actually think.
Do you think Rachel Reeves is qualified to be the UK Chancellor?
Well, look, I mean, who's qualified? I think Rachel, so having been there, I actually feel sorry for her. And I said that. People say, really? And the idea that there's some magical Labour Chancellor waiting in the wings, they would do exactly what she's doing. They would do exactly what she's doing. So, whether it's Rachel from accounts or whatever you want to call her, or Wes Streeting or Angela Raining or any of these people, the idea that they're going to do different things is completely for the birds. Whoever is in this Labour government doing that job would have done exactly what she's done.
So she's not really pulling any strings.
I think she's potentially a fall guy. But, if you looked at the news over the summer, it was all about how Number 10 had appointed Minouche Shafik, who ran Columbia University. She's in the economic team. They put Torsten Bell, he's the mansion tax guru. He used to run a think tank. They put him in the Treasury. The Labour backbenchers are cracking the whip as well. They didn't do the welfare reforms. You got the OBR. So the idea that this lady who's sitting in number 11 has full autonomy is for the birds. There's a whole bunch of other interests that are driving this thing. So is she qualified? She lied about her CV, which I think is terrible. But actually,
how does she keep her job then?
Yeah. So the serious thing, when she said she'd done 10 years at the Bank of England and she'd done 6, and then she said she was an economist at HBOS and she was some sort of bank official. That to me is serious, because actually a lot of people in the private sector would have been fired for a lot less. That I am worried about. There's a habit, I think, there. But would anyone else in that party do anything differently? I don't think so.
So apparently Labour have now raised taxes by about 70 billion.
Yeah, about that. So look, what happened in 2 years?
Yeah.
Well, barely in 18 months actually. They got in. So rewind the clock, and it's incredible how much has happened in a relatively short time. The election was on the 4th of July. No, well, yeah, it was the 4th of July, Independence Day, 4th of July, 2024. That isn't that long ago. It's about 16 months. So they get in July. They say, the evil Tories left us with a 22 billion black hole. Half of that was the trade union deal. Because if you remember, they whacked up train drivers' pay. They did a deal with nurses. They did a deal with doctors. So half of the 22 billion black hole was the public sector deal, the pay deals that they did. So it was 22 billion. We contested the figure, but give them the 22 billion. Then in November last year, they raised taxes. I remember opening up the Times, 35 billion increase. It wasn't 35 billion. It was 40 billion. They raised 40 billion in taxes last year. And 25 billion of that, 60%, was all on national insurance for employers. People like you, Rob. You collectively paid 25 billion of that 40 billion. And she said at the time, the evil Tories left such a mess. This is a stabilizing budget. I won't come back for more. She pretty much said that. This is a one-off 40 billion raise. And of course, yesterday, 26 billion? Some people say it's towards 30, looking at the fine print. So as you say, you're right, it's at least 66, maybe up to 70 billion in 2 budgets. And that's a huge amount of money. And a lot of that is going to deal with welfare. So 26 billion, if you look at the thresholds, I think it's roughly about 8 billion. And the 8 breaks down beautifully. 3 billion is scrapping the cap on two-child, the benefits for 2 children, so that you can have more. If you have more children, you get benefits. That's 3 billion. And 5 billion was the welfare reform that they didn't get through. So the entire income tax increase, in terms of freezing the threshold, is going to welfare, essentially.
How does that make you feel?
I'm concerned, because I think, actually my biggest fear is that they get back in. And it won't be the Labour Party, it'll be a coalition of the left. Labour, the Greens, maybe a bit of Lib Dem in there, SNP, Plaid might have 4 or 5, who knows. That's my biggest fear, because then you'll get a much more left-wing government than, if you can imagine it, you have today. That's my biggest fear. But we've got to just accept the fact they're going to be running the country for another 3 years. My real fear also is that in that time, we've looked at their first two budgets. They've raised 40 billion the first time. They raised 26 billion in tax this year. They've got another 3 years of budgets. And do I think they're suddenly going to balance the books and not raise taxes? No, I don't. I think they're going to raise taxes every single year they're in. And that frightens me.
And what do you think of Rachel Reeves continuing to blame the Conservatives for all the mess that we're in right now? Because she did it at the budget again, the Conservative legacy.
Part of the reason she's doing it is because George Osborne very successfully pinned on Labour in 2010 the fact that the previous Labour government had run out of money. And, he used phrases like they didn't fix the roof while the sun was shining. And he kind of won that argument with the British people, and then Conservatives were re-elected in 2015. So I think that what Rachel Reeves is trying to do is a repeat of that. And, there was politics in what George Osborne was doing, and in some ways he was right, but in some ways he was wrong. I mean, Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown actually did a very good job in the financial crisis. I mean, they marshalled finance ministers around the world to inject liquidity into the global economy, to stop banks going bust, which would have, bankrupted all our economies. Very, very difficult times. And in that crisis, they didn't do a bad job at all. And, I think they obviously made other mistakes. But so there's an element of politics in all of this. But what I would say to Rachel is, you can do your political thing, but, you've got to have a plan to go with it. As George Osborne was, presenting that narrative, he was also cutting public spending by 19% in real terms. I mean, much bigger cuts than Margaret Thatcher ever did. And so he was taking very brave decisions. And that's what I'm not really seeing from the government. I'd like to know what the plan is. Yesterday, I was really hoping we would see what their plan is for economic growth. I get that they don't want cutting taxes to be part of it, but there's lots of other things you can do. Planning reform, for example, welfare reform, public sector productivity. There are lots and lots of things. The NHS, 10% of the economy. What that actually means is that if you improved NHS productivity growth to 2% a year, which is the long-term rate in the private sector, it actually has an impact on our actual GDP numbers, because it's 10% of the economy. It actually adds 0.1, 0.2% annual GDP growth, and that's in the direct control of the government. So that's why I think that's what you really need is a plan.
Okay, so let's go back to the specifics of the budget. Anything else that stood out for you?
So I think the pension grab was extraordinary. So that was, they call it the sacrifice, it's not self-sacrifice, it's the salary sacrifice. So essentially, if you're earning money, you can save up to £20,000, or you used to be able to save up to £20,000 for your pension a year, which would be protected from essentially national insurance on employees. They've cut that cap from 20,000 to 2,000. So 18 grand that of what you were saving every year of the 20 can now be taxed. That's big. And actually, I think it's a disincentive to saving, providing for your pension. That's, I think, a terrible signal on top of the property tax. And the other thing that isn't being picked up about the property tax is that will, you guys are property people, you understand property. That will have a cascading effect on property prices.
You mean the mansion tax?
The mansion tax. So, if if a house that was worth, 2.1 million sells for 1.8, that has a cascading effect on all the houses that up to that price point. The idea that, you're sitting in your 600,000, 500,000 pound house and that it's going to go up in value when you've got essentially a cap, you've got a mansion tax at 2 million. That's not going to happen. You're not going to see the gains that you might have seen before. So it's got a cascading effect, which will impact in a negative way people's net worth.
So one thing that I was slightly in support of, actually, I don't often say I support Labour policies, but I did like the idea of incentivising investing. I think that not enough investing is taught in school.
Sure.
I think a lot of people think that saving is investing, which I don't.
Which it isn't, no.
So she reduced the cash ISA in the guise that, well, then that encourages investing, but then she didn't increase the stocks and shares or the investing ISA.
No.
So she took it off us to say, go and invest it, but she didn't give us a benefit anywhere else. So actually she just took away.
So what she would argue, and I kind of understand this to an extent. If you're saving £20,000, that's your limit, and you could put it all in cash. And she's saying, well, actually, we're going to cap the amount of cash you put in to 12,000, and the assumption is that the 8,000 will then go into the stock market. And though many of you here will know the stock market, it's doing okay, but there aren't enough listings, there isn't enough activity really in it. And so that was one of the things that I don't think I fully agreed with it, because obviously if you want to save 20 grand, you should be able to save it in whichever way you want. But I understand the fact that they want to encourage investment in shares and stocks.
And what do you think of all this fiscal drag and this?
That's horrific. I mean, that is, and we did it, and we try to stop that. But the fiscal drag, and this is why I refer to the mansion tax, because exactly the same thing will happen. The way in which officials work, the Treasury works, and I just saw a man this morning goes, oh, thank God, I'm so pleased. I was so worried the mansion tax. I thought I was going to have to pay 50 grand a year. And I'm like, they never do that. They always introduce it little by little. It's like the boiling frog. You don't just drop the frog in a boiling vat of water. They'll jump straight out. You just slowly ratchet up the heat. So they brought it in. They've said it's going to be at 2 million. It's going to be a flat rate at 2,500, which is actually 0.5% of the difference between 1.5 million. That was the proposal that was put to me when I was there, was we were going to have a 0.5% over 1.5 million. So it's kind of similar. Anyway, that's where it starts. And as you look at the thresholds, they've been frozen for years. We froze them. So you get to a point where 40% being paid at 50 grand a year is totally not what was envisaged back in the late 80s. Because obviously 50 grand a year, I remember, was a hell of a lot of money, or 40 grand a year was a hell of a lot of money to be earning. So it comes in at a level where you think, oh, it's nothing to do with me, it's just rich people. But then they just freeze the threshold, and then they'll increase the rate. So they'll freeze the threshold at 2 million for God knows how long, if they get back in, that is. And then they can say, actually 2.5, we'll just put that up to 4,000. We'll double it. And that's where you get the real revenue. So it starts off in a kind of mild, moderate way. And then once you've got the lever, you can then dial up the pressure. And that's typically what happens.
What do you think about the Renters' Rights Act, and what will that do to the property market?
I think the property market is under a lot of pressure. I think the mansion tax will have a cascading effect. If you're paying extra to buy a £2 million house, you're incentivized to bid under 2 million for the house. And if you're paying 1.9 million, that will have a cascading effect on house prices beneath that price point. That's just logic to me. So that's a big pressure. I think the renters, the rights of the renters also is discouraging residential property. And a friend of mine, who's made a lot of money in residential property, just doesn't do it anymore because of the regs, because of the tax. And people can make money in it in the right parts of the country, but it's under pressure. So the whole Labour, and they probably like this, but I think it does put pressure on property downwards.
But their problem is housing and the big shortage.
Yeah.
And yet they're making the one type of person who helps them, the landlord, the enemy. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And it only makes sense if you're going to flood the market with new houses, which they're not doing.
I understand now that Labour have increased taxes since they've been in power by 70 billion. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, I think might be 66, but that sort of number, yes.
Why are they not looking at reducing their spending?
Well, the reason they're not looking at doing it is because they find it very hard, not least because the unions are a very big part of the Labour movement. So when it comes to public sector pay awards. Conservatives have a higher tolerance for strikes if there are disagreements on what's fair. And, that's not necessarily a good thing, because you saw we had lots of strikes under the previous Conservative government, and they were very disruptive and painful. But we were prepared to take on the unions when we thought their demands were unreasonable, and Labour is less willing to do that. So that's probably the reason. The other thing is, which I think is, a real mistake, is that Labour are trying to hold up this word austerity, which they've turned into a kind of totally negative thing. Whereas, having run my own business, I think you should always be looking to spend money more efficiently and to cut costs where you can. And even more so if you're in charge of the state, which is spending £1 trillion of taxpayers' money. But they've kind of turned any kind of, demand for more efficiency into a kind of dirty word. So that's why they're doing it. But the mistake here is that, if you look around the world, there are parts of the world that are doing really well. And it's, North America, it's Asia, it's, even places like China. And what do they all have in common compared to Europe, which is in this, slow lane of economic growth? They all have lower tax rates. And there are, economists will tell you that one of the reasons for that is that if the state spends too much, it stops the private sector growing. It crowds out private sector investment. By the way, the Office for Budget Responsibility also agree with that, because they factored in less investment by the private sector as taxes go up. But I think as business people, and I'm guessing there's quite a few business people in the audience here, we kind of understand there's something different about it, which is that a dynamic economy needs animal spirits. It needs people who will go out there and take risks, as you've done, Rob, as I've done, as I'm sure people in this room have done, who say we're going to start our own business, we're going to be brave. And one of the things that makes you hesitate is if the rewards aren't worth the effort. And that's the problem with when taxes get too high.
So what can we do to grow the economy? What should we do?
So I think we've got to, as a country, I keep coming back to this. I think they've got to deal with spending. Because what's happening now is that the spending tail, if you want to put it that way, is wagging the dog of national productivity in the economy. And it's all driven by spending. I don't think Rachel Reeves wanted to increase taxes. It's just that, she's got these backbenchers who won't let her reduce spending. And in order to pay for it, she thinks she has to, clobber the rich, in inverted commas. And it's madness. But that's what's driving all of this. You've got 4 million people on benefits in this country, and there are no sanctions. They don't have to look for work. You've got about 9 million on benefits, but at least 5 million of them have to normally, go out and look for work. 4 million, they just get the benefits willy-nilly. And in a country of 70 million, which we are now, adult population, 45, 50 million, 4 million people receiving benefits is a hell of a lot.
Isn't it quite a high percentage of the people who can work?
Yeah, it is. It's a very high percentage. And in terms of, I did this sort of experiment. I like thinking in terms of concrete examples. The Chinese army is the largest army in the world. They've got 1.5 billion people. Their army is 2 million people. Okay, it's the largest army in the world. We've got twice as many on benefits with 70 million people. It's kind of crazy, okay? So that, I think it's a real problem. But check those figures. The army might be 2.5 million, but it's not more than that. The figures vary. But we've got almost twice as many, if not twice as many people as the Chinese army on benefits.
And a fraction,
of the population. That's right. And that is the largest army in the world, the largest of any army. Anyway, just ponder that. And that's how this thing has got out of control. And it's tough. It's very hard. And unless people grapple with... And to be fair to Labour, I don't like being fair to them, but to be fair, I remember ministers... I do GMB, Good Morning Britain, every week. And I remember ministers coming on that programme saying, this is unsustainable. When they were trying to prepare people for the welfare reforms that were going to save the 5 billion, that Darren Jones and others said, this is unsustainable. Of course, they don't say that now because they've just gone with the flow.
Yeah.
But they were right to say that we can't sustain this.
So if you were given more time when you were Chancellor, what would you have done?
So I think where we went wrong, and I've said this to Liz, I've said this to other people, is if you're going to be unpopular, you've got to try and be unpopular doing the right thing, okay? And I think grappling with and it's not just about benefits. It's about the whole gamut of government, the waste, all of that. Unless you grapple with that, and it's going to be hard, I don't see how you can reform this, because the logic of the OBR and all of that is that, you know, you've got a lump of expenditure which you have to cover, and you've got to raise taxes. And we try to reduce taxes, but the markets were like, well, who's going to pay for all of this stuff? That's why they freaked out. And also because we rolled it out very quickly. But I think that unless you actually grapple with expenditure, it's very difficult to see how you get off this, this roller coaster.
How do you think Kemi did in the budget and her exchange with Rachel Reeves, and how the world views that?
Well, some people have criticised it because it was quite a personal exchange. She, had that exchange where she talked about mansplaining and so on. But if you sit in the House of Commons week in, week out and listen to the way Keir Starmer dismisses Kemi as being, a complete irrelevance, that is, equally personal in its impact. And I'm afraid that just is British politics, and it's part of the style. It's not my style of politics. I try and avoid that kind of exchange in public, but it's part of the robustness of our democracy. And I'm not sure I would really want any controls that stopped it happening. I think the fact that we have free speech is a good thing and an important thing for the country. And I think I would rather have those kinds of exchanges than, what they have in autocracies, where everyone is frightened of saying things that upset the leaders because they could get put in prison. So not an easy thing to absolutely get right, but I don't think I would change it.
Jeremy, thank you very much. Kwasi, thank you very much.
Thank you.